Welcome to Monetize Your Passion, a podcast for moms looking to turn their passions into online brands that serve others. I'm Tara Lon, a content strategist with over 10 years of experience creating viral content seen by millions. I'm here to help you grow your brand and reach the people God has called you to serve. Hello and welcome to the show. So on today's episode, I have Harvey-Jacob Law's principal attorney, Danelle Harvey-Jacob. She helps entrepreneurs correctly and proactively set up, confidently build their businesses, and protect their brands, assets, and loved ones. On today's episode, we're going to talk about 7 must-haves to consider when running your business. So please take in mind that this is general advice. You should always consult with a legal expert because every state is different. There's different laws. There's different nuances to your business. So this is a general conversation. So without further ado, let's get into it. So let's just get into the heart of the conversation. We'll talk about 7 must-haves, and I'm sure there's other things that entrepreneurs should have, but these are 7 primary things that, we just want to get your take on it. So the first thing, so let's say someone is just starting out, maybe they want to have some sort of shop. They're just starting out. I would say a bank account. Like, what are your thoughts there? Like one of the first things that you think they need.
I'm going to reframe it, okay?
Bank account. A business bank account.
I'm going to reframe it because there is like a toolkit. There's like a whole load of things. I wouldn't say like, go for a business account first, but absolutely. When we're talking about bank accounts, it's so important to have separate bank accounts, right? Personal, business. Even if you're not an even if you haven't set up a limited liability company, it's always wise for an entrepreneur to have separate bank accounts. Keep it separate. It's the short answer.
Yes.
Short answer.
Yeah, that's the short answer. And what are the benefits of them keeping it separate? Because there may be someone who is combining everything and they think it's okay.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. So, it depends. It depends is a good legal answer, right? Essentially, there are many different benefits. One is just good bookkeeping. You have things in order, you know what's for the business and what isn't. But from a legal standpoint, one of the ways it protects is because you're not commingling funds. And when it comes to liability, which is a big part of what legal is all about, right? It's protecting you from personal liability, meaning that you don't want in a lawsuit in this country where everyone sues everyone, right? Or, even for the most innocent reason, they might not mean to, but they have to. You want to make sure that if someone sues you or if there's an accident, if something happens, that they cannot come for you. They cannot come for your assets, meaning your home, your car, your personal effects, things that might be valuable, that are important to you. A business account is not the only way. It's part of the toolkit. But the point is that it's a clear way when someone's trying to prove that your personal assets are reachable. This is one aspect of it where you can say, no, it's always been separate. I've run my business and all my business has gone through my bank account, my business bank account, all the transactions and all the things I've done versus I've been using my personal account to run my business, meaning making business purchases or whatever, receiving business income. I'm trying to keep it simple because, I'm an in-depth person, but hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, absolutely.
Liability protection is one big one. There's tax reasons, but I'm not talking about tax law today, and that's not what I'm focusing on. But so there's there are more reasons, but hopefully that's good enough to kind of get.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. Across. I mean, there's always nuances, every individual may need something different. So, we're just talking general here so people can start thinking about that for their business. The second thing I have here is a proper business registration. What are your thoughts there? And what are the different types of registration for those who don't know?
Okay. So I'll scale back a little bit. Registration in legal terms, not every business needs to be registered, but again, general, I don't like that word. Generally, if the business is limited liability in some way, an LLC, a corporation, a limited partnership, then generally it will need to be registered because it's a specific type, you're trying to protect your assets or protect yourself. So businesses like that typically need to be registered. However, even even if it's not a limited business, a limited liability business or company, there's always something like a license, perhaps. I'll say always. There's likely to be maybe a license requirement or a permit requirement. And it depends on the type of business. There might be professional licensing requirements, but ultimately there'll be some kind of a letting the state or the government know that I've got this business in some way, shape, or form. So
Yes.
I hope that was not, because registration isn't always required for, say, a sole proprietor. If you don't have an LLC, you don't have to register with the state, but you might have to have a business license to operate legally.
Yes, right.
So,
because, for example, I had a shop. I was selling goods. And for my state, which is California, I had to have a sales license. Is that what you mean, like with a registration? So that was a certain type of registration. That was a license,
right? In addition to a business license, right? So they're separate. So there are different licenses, and I'm a California attorney, so and state by state there's different requirements, but generally, there are going to be licensing requirements. I say generally, just make sure you check into it and find out what is required for what you're going to do. Because there might be home ownership, I'm saying it wrong. Working from home license, permits. It depends, but licensing, permits, registration are three things that people need to look into, and how it applies to them obviously will differ. And I will always say it's best to get someone who knows what they're doing, because I deal with this a lot. And people are stunned at how much goes into it, and they just thought, it's just this simple little thing, even setting up their LLC or getting an agent to set it up, not realizing that actually that could cause problems. We won't go there. That might cause problems down the line because of strategy and protection. But the point is, so licensing, permits, registrations. I know I jumped to another area, but they are kind of, if you're not a sole proprietor, you're not going to register. So what else would you do, right? So, but licensing, registration, and permits is something that everyone should just double check to determine what they need.
Yeah. And that will depend on state by state too. Is that correct? Like depending on where they live?
Yeah, each state has their own way of doing things. I'm thinking about the federal side of it, but essentially, I'm only going to speak in this to California, right? But generally there's licensing and permit requirements across the country, everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. But, I cannot speak to specifics, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So this segues into the third thing. I know we kind of touched on it, is choosing and forming the right legal entity. I know we talked about it some, but can you just go over the different entities that are out there? And I don't know if you have recommendations. I mean, I know I have a recommendation, but I'm not an attorney, but can you just go through them quickly?
So there's is it four? Okay, so there's sole proprietorship, which is where you don't have limited liability. There's partnerships, there's limited liability companies, and then there's corporations. That's typically what it all boils down to. And then within that, there are different types of ways to set up. But I know where you're going, because there's a commonality and there's a common one that's always talked about, right? Typically LLCs. But essentially there are four, like I just mentioned. I'd love to touch upon partnerships, if it's okay, because it's something that a lot of people don't realize, is that, when you're with someone and you've got a great idea and it's like, let's do this together. That's a partnership if you start working towards it and transacting. So it's already there's already legal liability. And a lot of people don't realize this, which means that if someone were to get into one of the partners, because it effectively makes you legally a partner. So there's things like that, right? So some people don't know that they can actually limit liability in that situation. And it's just fun, right? I mean, I'm not trying to be a party pooper here. I'm trying to be I love entrepreneurship and I love setting up businesses, but there's things like that. So with partnerships, you can have general partnership, which is what I just mentioned, where there's no formality. It can be formalized. And then there's a limited partnerships in various stages. Like you can limit liability in many ways in partnerships, on and on and on. But those are the basics. And then there's LLCs, which is the common one that I imagine you're going to speak on, which is a limited liability company. And then there's corporations, and that could include nonprofits. That could include, but let's just say it goes in order of how much admin do you need. And also there are some people that cannot set up certain types of of businesses. And it depends on what you need. You know, there's things have shifted a little bit with LLCs and like people looking for investment, for example, or whatever. But there's typically, there's traditionally been a certain type that would be used for certain initiatives or certain enterprises, certain types, you know, like people going for seed rounds and getting investment, for instance, on a different type of business. And I don't want to get too into the weeds, but basically, let's just say that some things are more practical to run, less complicated, like an LLC or a sole proprietorship or even a partnership. But just know that within each of them, there are rules to follow and ways to protect from a liability perspective. There are also tax benefits as well. So it's really individual. It's really down to whoever, you know, a person to, this is why people need to sit down with that professional, whether it's legal and, you know, tax. And I always advocate for both, not just one or the other, both, because they both have different purposes. And tell them about your specific situation so that they can help you determine what would be the best business structure to do at this point in time. And you may have to shift later on, but if you've got a longer term vision, you might be able to figure it out sooner. But at the end of the day, it's always wiser to factor in your specific circumstances and speak to those professionals about one of those structures, because then they can help you determine the right one. And you might find that a partnership might be better than an LLC, but you can actually have a partnership tax structure in an LLC, but we won't go there today.
Yeah.
Don't want to get too complex, but anyway.
Yeah. So just to repeat that in order of protection, the sole proprietorship, that's the first one, which is not as much protection. And then the LLC, is that the second? And then the corporation?
So it goes, I do it in steps. I say, I say sole proprietor, partnership, LLC, corporation. And that goes, so sole proprietor is the least, the sole proprietorship is the least form of protection, as in liability protection, and a corporation has the most protections as far as liability goes. But then it's got its negatives. There are pros and cons for each. And this is where, you know, if you're in a corporation, there's more red tape. Certain people might not be able to set up one depending on their status. And then there's also the taxation. It's high taxation. So you want to do things to help lessen the taxes that go out. So it depends. It depends on where you are, who you are, what you got, what you're doing, what your capacity is, what, you know, because you have to, the biggest part of this, right, to, I suppose, round it up is why this is important, because with each structure, even though a sole proprietorship is not structure, but you have to make sure you do certain things to keep that protection, to keep that liability protection. And it gets more serious and more confusing or more complex, you know, the different type of structure that you have. So, for instance, a corporation has the most requirements to stay compliant, which means that there's more to do to be able to protect yourself against being personally sued or getting your assets, piercing the corporate veil is what it's called, but getting your assets, you know, someone reaching your assets. Whereas with an LLC, there's still stuff to do. So, but there's less to do. So it's just about, like I said, capacity. You know, what can I handle? What's realistic? It doesn't make sense for some people to just set up a corporation necessarily, because they might not even be earning, you know, in it with the tax that goes out. So anyway, there's my brain going off.
Yeah. No, you said that's clear. That makes sense. It's getting people thinking about it who need to. So the fourth thing that I have here are written contracts for paying clients. Now, there are some people who, that, you know, they may exchange services or even products. Let's say they're coaching someone, for example, and they may not even be thinking about a written contract. Would you suggest that should be a must-have for a small business?
My rule of thumb, my personal rule of thumb is essentially the minute there's an interaction with another person, a contract is likely to be required, because whether you have a written one or not, you still have a contract. So an oral contract or a written contract, there's still a contract. Mm-hmm. Which would you prefer? If something goes wrong, you could still get in trouble regardless of someone's paying you or not. And we're talking so internally and externally. So I mean, when I say that, like volunteers, interns, whatever it may be, your cousin helping. I know it might sound funny. I'm not saying contract with your cousin, but maybe it might not be a bad idea. But the point is like, a written contract states clearly what was agreed to, and hopefully we never have to have a dispute to fight about it. You know, hopefully it's just from the best possible perspective, everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, and they can hold each other accountable to it. And I'm talking about in a nice, peaceful sense, not in an adversarial sense. Does that make sense? So contracts, yes, I think, are wise. Anytime I'm working with somebody else, you know, anytime there's an interaction, because like I said, it's mainly because, you know, this is a very litigious society and you just never know. And also, it's not even about the other person. There are just ways that the state might state that you've done something. The state might state. The state might say that you've done something and breached a law or something, and you'd want to show that actually, no, that's not what was happening. And then you'd also want to make sure you understand what the risks are with what you're doing. But ultimately, you know, putting things in writing, I don't think it can hurt anyone. And contracts don't always have to be extensive and complex. If it's someone, you know, it just depends on the relationship. But I always think it's wise to have something in writing, no matter whether someone's paying or not, particularly if someone isn't paying. They might have a legal right to be paid and you don't know it. Even if you both agreed otherwise, right? So, and then you've breached some labor law and you don't know. And the next thing you know, you're on the hook. And I'm telling you, those penalties are not pretty. You could lose everything depending on how much is found to have been violated or whatever.
Yeah. So this kind of segues into number 5, which I have website legal protections like privacy policy, terms and conditions, disclaimers. But let's say, you know, because there's entrepreneurs listening, they may have digital products like courses that they sell, and maybe they have terms and conditions, but maybe what, you know, because someone might buy something and they get like an instant download or something. If they have the terms and conditions, could that satisfy the contract part? Or are you saying like they should have the contract as well separately?
It depends. Again, it depends. The contract might be in the terms and conditions, or it might be the terms and conditions. So again, I can't speak for, you know, I wouldn't want to say, because I don't know everybody's terms and conditions. It's not like there's a universal kind of template, which if there is, don't do that. But the point is that actually, this brings me to something that I always say, terms and conditions should be custom. A lot of people get these templates and think, I've got my terms and conditions, I've got my privacy policy. And the mistake they're making is they're not custom, which means it might miss out a lot of things that could protect you. For instance, like you say, there is nothing wrong necessarily with having a contract in the terms and conditions, but it depends, because if you haven't followed the other web rules, it might be irrelevant and you could still get into trouble and you can still have a dispute that doesn't serve you well. So there's more to it, right?
Yes.
So, but there are ways that a contract can be included into terms or other documents, other web documents. There are ways. I'm not saying that that's it though. Do it and you're set, because that's not the way at all. Because there's more to be done to make sure that it protects you. Is that making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I kind of clumped it together. Number 5, website legal protections. I mean, I have a website. You know, maybe everyone doesn't have a website, but on my website, you know, I have the privacy policy, terms and conditions, disclaimers. If someone doesn't have let's say they don't have their own website, those 3 things under website legal protections, would you suggest maybe on their sales page, like they should have those things?
Legally, a privacy policy is required, full stop.
Right. That's what I thought.
So if they don't have it, then if they don't have it, they're violating the law. So everyone, if you've got a website, everyone has to have a privacy policy. It's the law. The other 2 aren't legally required necessarily, but they're smart to have because they protect you if they're done well, if they've been drafted appropriately, and if they actually make sense to your life, to your business. They're smart to have. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, why would you not? You know, to me, it's like, this is why they're commonly bundled together. Have those things. It makes sense from a protective perspective, have them. But privacy policy, you legally have to have it. You have to have it under law. So, you know, so, and another thing I will say is, because we handle, like I say, we do across the board areas of law that all, you know, overlap and help entrepreneurs. So we actually do, web audits, cyber law, cybersecurity law. That's an area that I handle, right? And one of the things that's important to remember as well is that, your audience is typically nationwide, right? Is that correct?
Yes,
Or is
they
it?
are. And
Yeah,
they're national and international,
national
actually.
and international.
Mhm.
So, and again, I'm not speaking to give advice to anyone, but I will say from a California perspective, there are specifics that California requires. Each state is different. So there's more beyond, because there's federal law that governs it and there's state law that governs web law. It's not quite, like an easy thing to understand. But the point is that there are certain things required under federal law and there's certain things that are required under state law, and each state's different, but California is very strict and stringent. And then there's European, GDPR, right? There are different laws internationally that we all have to consider if we are impacting a citizen of that place. So that's the point, right? So that's kind of what's meant to be done. So you're meant to protect yourself against someone. I don't know if people know that it's possible to be sued from someone in the European Union just by breaching web law. Just even you've never left the country, even if you're in the US, and vice versa. It's possible to do that if you are impacting that citizen. It happens in California. If a California citizen is impacted by someone's webpage and they've reached that person, they could actually effectively be sued and penalized. And we're talking like a lot of money. So it's a serious thing, right? Does that make sense? Anyway, I'm just trying to say.
I
Just
know
look
when
at
you
it.
go, it makes sense. When you go to someone's website, you have to accept, I forgot what it's called.
The cookies.
Is it the cookies that you accept? It was something else I thought.
There's a lot you have to accept, but there's a lot. But cookies is a common one.
Yeah.
Like basically it says I'm gonna let you spy on me. That's basically what it says.
Yes.
That's basically what it means. I'm gonna let you spy and see everything I do and kind of understand me so that you can sell to me.
Right. Right.
But I don't mean to sound cynical, honestly.
Oh no.
I've got a very bizarre sense of humor. But so cookies is a typical one. You mean like those pop-ups? There's other things as well, but ultimately, just to make it simple again for this conversation, is you need to have someone to look at what you're doing. So if you're going to get your web policy, privacy policy terms, all of that, just ultimately have someone that knows the area of law and understands differences with the jurisdictions. And I don't mean to frighten anyone, but like I know this stuff, and especially coming from the UK, like we started it. Well, not the UK, but the European Union. And we started all of this strict protections, right? So anyway, that's what it is. So, get the documents, have someone check it over, review your website to see that whether it's a thing or not, whether it's goable, whether it's viable, and you're likely to get into trouble. Always do reviews. That's what we do anyway. I'm not plugging at all, but I'm just saying it's because I know it's so important. Have someone that knows what they're doing, look over it and just to say, give you that assurance. Okay, I'm doing it right. This is correct.
Right.
Whether it's a contract you need.
Okay. Yes. So getting to the 6th point, I have here basic business insurance. You would recommend basic business insurance?
Ooh, I recommend insurance. Basic is not a word I use. So
okay.
I'm sorry, but it's one of those things I don't, it's a running joke in my circles. Dee doesn't do basic. I just don't do basic. Like, no, because but insurance is important. It's necessary because, especially for sole proprietors, because they haven't even got, everyone needs it. It doesn't matter. Don't think that if you're in a limited liability company, an LLC, that you don't need insurance. Like, everyone needs insurance. If you think about it, if you have a home and you have insurance, you want to just protect, because that helps buffer, assuming the insurance is valid. We're not going to go there, but it helps buffer claims against your personal assets, does that make sense? So as much as you can do that's going to protect what's personal, add it in. And especially, liability claims, then there's accident claims. There's all kinds of different insurance levels. If you're online, if you're not online, there might be like premises liability. There's all kinds of insurance, but there's workers' comp insurance, which is slightly different, but it's insurance. But it's important to look into all, as much as possible, what kind of insurance would I need? And if you're thinking, I think where you're going was basic, meaning starting out, right? Is that what you were coming from? Like, what would I need to just get started? I would say, if you want to look at budget, you want to look at what can you afford to lose. My way is like, what can you afford to risk what can you afford to lose? Because it's a risk if you're not doing it full on. But we'll, like I said, I've started businesses with zero, right? So I understand, like this, and these are my limitations, but I still want to run a business. But I found ways. There are ways. Maybe that's another conversation you and I can have. But there are ways to get insurance still without, if you're stuck at that level. But ultimately, if you could get one thing, just look into the different types of insurance policy. It's about what's important to you, liability. Even house insurance. Your house insurance might cover you to some extent, but they will need to know it's a business that you're running. So you might already be paying for something that can protect you.
Right. That's what I was wondering. Like you might already be paying for insurance.
Might.
Like if you've already have, let's say the entity set up, it might include some sort of insurance with that, right?
I don't know, right? So this is the thing. Do some delving and see what I already have. Because this is the thing, like what's in your hand, right? I'm big on that, like the oil and the jars, like we already have a lot of what we need and we don't realize it. So it's one of the things, just look around, delve, think about it. You might have it with your bank, your card. You might have insurance that can keep you going until you can get to the next level. But it's always wise to have, for me, in my mind, if you're online, or if you have a website or you use email, cyber insurance is important. It's critical nowadays. Look at how many hacks are going on. Do you know that if there's a breach of some kind, you could still be held liable if it came through your, ultimately the service provider could be a part of it as well, but you could still be on the hook. So having insurance could help pay for liability, so we just want to protect ourselves as much as possible. Cybersecurity, professional liability, if you're a professional, as in licensed professional, but ultimately, basics, like liability insurance is a common one because we're talking about liability here. But just do a dive, Does that answer your question?
Yes. And then the seventh thing, as we wind down the conversation, I have here foundational tax and record keeping, just considerations. Like, let's say someone's selling something, some people may not think about the tax implications. And I don't know if that's more business than legal, but do you have any?
No, I do. I'm not just legal. I am business, and I am that. Actually, what we do in our firm is, we actually help entrepreneurs understand all this so they can set, I even wrote about it in my book, like years ago. That's the whole point, right? You set up a practice where you put aside, you estimate what you're going to, and again, this is not tax advice. This is just common sense. This is something I learned the hard way after paying out a lot. Because years ago when my daughter was younger, but ultimately, again, this isn't tax advice, and always speak to your tax advisor. However, it's just important to, I would say, from a business standpoint, if someone understands what their estimated income is going to be, like, I want to earn this much, how much would I pay in tax? Then you can technically put money aside every time. What I do is, what I did even at the very beginning, way before I became an attorney, and I've always done it, and it's been so good, is that every time I earn something, I put aside that proportion. So say it's 30%, I estimate I'm going to have to pay. Even if it comes over, it doesn't matter. I can always pay myself back at the end, but I'll put it in an account, I'll put it away so that I'm only looking at what I've got to work with. Does that make sense? So ultimately, best, I would say, look at what you think you're going to earn. Even if it's, you're making it up, but don't. There's a way to actually plan strategically.
Yes,
to do this,
that's a good strategy. Yeah.
But ultimately, like on a big pic, kind of an overview of it all.
Yeah, top level.
What am I aiming towards? How much tax would that look at? And we can all look at tax. Like taxes change all the time, don't they? But someone earning between this amount is likely to pay this much tax. But you want to think about taxes, local taxes, state taxes, federal tax, because they're all different. And this is another reason why structuring an LLC, for instance, or a C corporation, you have to talk to a good business attorney, because a lot of people miss that part and they don't realize that they're setting up in the wrong way and they're actually leaking money that they're paying into taxes that they didn't have to. They could have used to invest and make more money or put back into the business. I just had to chuck that in. But record keeping, especially for corporate veil purposes, like I was speaking about earlier, to be protecting yourself against liability claims or for your personal assets to be reached, ultimately, you have to keep records. Everyone should, no matter what structure you have, because it helps you and it helps you legally. and it just helps you get things in order. It's really
Yeah.
important.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Danelle, for being on. This is so helpful. Now, can you just tell us where we can find you? Let's say someone's listening, they want to use your services or buy your book. Can you
Yeah.
just let us know where to go?
Absolutely. So harveyjacoblaw.com is my website. I actually run live masterclasses every month, estate planning for entrepreneurs and business succession, and live masterclasses for business and life. Really help you get everything protected, not just business, but all of your life, legally and obviously just get organized. But if you go there, go to harveyjacoblaw.com. It's a good start because then you can see all the things to sign up for. And I've got great opt-ins, like legal starter kits that you don't have to pay for, and you can just download that and get started. So you've got a nice little checklists and things like that. And I do email newsletters, go to the website and sign up, and then you'll just get all the info and we can go from there. And if you ever want to talk, you can click on the consultation button, and I'd love to speak further with you and help. I'm absolutely passionate about this. So let's get you properly protected so you don't fall into those issues.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode, would you do me a favor and share this with someone else who could use this? My prayer is that you will pursue your God-led dreams so you can make a positive impact in the world. Until next time.